Welcome to track 16. My name's Sean Meredith. I'm the director of the gallery. So if something comes up, if you need anything, you can find me, or there's also Cesar in the back who's working the sound back there. So it's really an honor to have both Alicia Piller, our artist of this amazing exhibition, along with Jill Moniz. And so I'm going to read kind of their bios in a little bit and to say a couple other things, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I'm going to read, there's going to be kind of like the printed bios in a way, but it helps a little background. So Jill Moniz is an independent-minded curator of visual narratives. Her curatorial investigations, launched from her nonprofit project space, Transformative Arts, supports local artists and communities in site-specific installations and activations. Her noted exhibitions in Los Angeles include LA Blacksmith at the California African American Museum from 2019 and 2020. And that included work by like Adrian Devine and Noah Purifoy and Allison Saar and Betty Saar and Kehinde Wiley and others. And then at Craft Contemporary in 2019, she also curated The Riddle Effect. And then recently, it was a really great show, a Photo Flux on Shuttering LA at the Getty. And that included Rodrigo Valenzuela, who's in this building, along with April Banks and Todd Gray, among many other great photographers. And she keeps her bio very brief. And also, one of the things when I was thinking about inviting her to come, what happened was she came to see her show, and we had an engaging conversation, and it was one of the first time we really talked, and it was just also just a very frank, interesting conversation. And one of the things that came up is that they both studied anthropology, and I thought I could, needle her into agreeing to do this talk if, saying we'd love, and I really would. She was saying she would like to talk to Alicia more, and I thought I really want to listen to that conversation. And so there was one interesting thing when I was reading up on Jill a little bit in an interview with Shayna in the LA Weekly. She said, "Where can we go and have a glimpse into the spectacular? I think it should be part of your daily life. It should be so much so that the extraordinary becomes ordinary in your interaction with it." And it just sort of that was really splendid. And I think it sort of starts to expect a lot from us on what we should be doing with our lives. And I think it's good to have high expectations. So, and then wonderful Alicia. So, I don't know. She along with Becky, coordinated, wrangled, did the unthankless job of helping organize the 2019 CalArts grad shows that were in this building for the MFAs. And there were so many complaints to them about, my spot isn't perfect, my this, that, and they were both so gracious about it that I just so appreciated them. And then I saw what she had installed in this building, and it was so amazing. And so it was really just so fortuitous that this came together. It's such an amazing show. So I'm going to read just her bio also. Los Angeles-based artist Alicia Piller was born and raised in Chicago and received her bachelor's in both fine arts painting and anthropology from Rutgers in New Jersey in 2004. While working in the fashion industry and living a decade in New York City and 3.5 years in Santa Fe, Piller cultivated her distinctive sculptural voice, continuing to expand her artistic practice. Alicia completed her MFA, focused on sculpture and installation from CalArts in May 2019. As a method to locate the root of human histories, Alicia merges the new and discarded, experimenting with a wide range of materials to construct large-scale works that mimic forms of cellular biology. And Piller envisions historical traumas, both political and environmental, through the lens of a microscope. Piller's mixed media practice is as much about materiality as it is about content, attempting to reconcile questions about the current state of our times. She works on a macro and micro level, breathing life into materials that have been removed from their natural environment, manipulating things like resin and latex balloons. Stemming from her background as a clown, each work becomes a biological unfolding of time, examining the energy around wounds societies have inflicted upon themselves and others. So without further ado,
I forgot that clown part was in there.
you put it in print.
I know, I'm like, oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
So normally I have a sort of very free flow conversation with artists, but you have
We
notes.
can totally do that.
So I'm intrigued by your notes. So I'm going to sort of riff off.
Scared.
I know. See, this is what you started. But I feel like now we should start with the Dogon because
Oh my God.
that's sort of where it all starts.
Wow, you're blowing my mind.
I mean, do you know, it was in your notes.
I
I'm
know,
just
I know,
going
I know.
off what you talked about, what you wrote down. So one of the main reasons I think I started in art history and then went to anthropology is because I felt that the text around objects, especially non-Western objects, was so lacking and so critical in a very pejorative kind of way, but also the sense of ownership over it. And so I had to, for me, sort of back out of that space and go to a space where I wanted to understand how they decided they got to name and know. And, one of the most important legacies of the diaspora and the African continent is the Dogon, and what they know that was unexplainable to the West.
Exactly.
And so I see so many elements of them in your work. So do we need background on Dogon before we dive in? So the Dogon are a people of Mali, and they're an old ethnic group, but they trace their lineage to the star Sirius. And they can chart this star in the sky without any, obviously, equipment. And it took the West, I think, several hundred years to figure out Sirius existed and where it was. And the West needs telescopes to find this star and refused to believe any connection that these people had. But not only did they have this connection, but so much of their culture is rooted in the material. If you've noticed, if you've been to a museum and you've seen those beautiful wood ladders that are solid wood, or granary doors that are carved so beautifully, but every part of their existence is rooted deeply in the earth and in material, but also in the cosmos. So it's this constant bridging, which is what you do. Microscopic, macroscopic, up and down, with a really fine and robust attention to their relationship to both things, to the earth and to the cosmos. And it seems like that is a beautiful place to start because that is so much of your practice.
Yes.
So tell me, you want to do this as a test?
Oh God.
I'm just kidding. But tell me how you translate that. What's the power for the Dogon for you?
Well, I have a lot of anthropological, if we use that word, but a lot of influences from many cultures. And so that group of people were able to see something that we can't see, and that is really what the work is about, which is trying to manifest through material something that is unseen, whether that's an energy, whether it's a feeling, whether it's a time frame. What does that time frame feel like? What's the residue of that? What can it look like with material? And so to me, that the Dogon were it's just unreal. It was a moment of oh my God, technology has nothing to do with their knowledge. Mm-hmm. Their knowledge is deep set. And really, when I first started studying anthropology, what really led me to, I was really studying cultural anthropology and really interested in objects, obviously, but Aboriginal culture and thinking about Dreamtime and the works that they were making were topographical and spiritual at the same time. So I have this connection to that energy throughout many different cultures, and so they were on my list of all my.
Oh, we can get into the dreaming too. We can go there, but
but really, okay. So one aspect of the work that is a really big influence is this woman named Vera Stanley Alder. She was a spiritualist and a portrait artist, but she was living like in the 40s. She was probably in her 30s, 40s year old, and she was kind of questioning the state of the times, which is what I'm always doing. And she wrote this book that was documenting her experience with this being that came from, she was doing meditations, and she was like, I want to understand why we're having this World War II. Like, why is the world the way it is? And so supposedly she had visitations from this being that took her, like shrunk her down, and she's describing every layer, every moment, and then she shrinks down to an atom. And she's describing an atom, and there was no description for an atom then. And so that connects to the Dogon, where it's like this knowledge that you have without the science, without the like, well, this person said this, you know?
Yeah.
And so she was describing it, and then this being took her out to the great expanse and was like literally, you know, she's seeing the solar system, and this connective thread between every single thing. And again, she's describing an atom from that distance. So from both sort of realms, it's like it's this infiniteness that she's describing.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, that is the most like powerful sort of like, I can't get that vision out of my head. So when I'm working, like even specifically for this show, I was really thinking a lot about the what is the viewpoint that I'm seeing things from. And sometimes they were like me literally from above the earth, zooming down and looking down. And the show is kind of playing with weather and politics. So like, what does that storm system look like when you look down? So I like the perspective. I like having, finding out and discovering different perspectives. And that's why the Dogon was super like shocking to me. I was just like, why are people not talking about this more? You know, like they knew about the rings on Saturn and Jupiter, different stuff how would they know that? You know, so that kind of stuff just like, ooh, I love it. I'm sorry.
But I mean, so it's interesting to me because your work you talk about trauma in your work. And if you zoom out, like on the Dogon or even Vera or on the Aboriginal dreaming, there is a violence that happens when they encounter the West, right? Or when the West encounters them, and this erasure of value and knowledge practices, right? So it's interesting to me that your work has that quality of examining these larger violences against people, but also the more tangible ones when you look at the environment, when you look at, you know, I think those are pornographic magazines over there.
Wow, no.
No? You know, it's so
I was like,
funny.
what is your
I was looking so closely. I was like, what is the symbol? What's the imagery on those things? Because I was feeling like the sense of, you know, that perspective of viewpoints, and it looked like bodies. Anyway, where I went with it was like, you know, the idea that we are stripped literally from the earth, that we are removed, even nudity becomes something pornographic versus something natural and organic. You know, so I
love hearing what you like see. It's amazing.
So, you know, so there is this sense of like removal that happens, that violence is in some ways even more lasting, you know, because you sat here and you said, how do they do that? It's so almost unimaginable, but it is so imaginable if we are allowed to have access to it.
Yes.
And that's where the trauma I think, is.
Yeah. I feel like I'm constantly trying to tackle the trauma and reconcile it and creating my own sort of talismans or whatever to sort of help me. I mean, I want to do it for everyone, but it's like I'm in there and by myself. The process is like there needs to be some hope. There needs to be something through this trauma. So for me, I'm constantly when I do a body of work, I'm noticing this pattern where I'm like tackling the trauma and then letting that narrative story lead me to some future moment that is usually more hopeful. And so the piece that she's talking about that has the newspaper elements, that's from a Full Bleed magazine, which is an arts magazine. And the reason why I was playing with that magazine because I had so many, and I'm a collector of objects, and so I was like, I need to make something. So I was just working and playing and making, and then it became something totally different. That piece, it's got this sort of acid rain flowing underneath. And that's the moment in the show for me that it's this shift from the weather, from the storm system being this horrible system that's destructive to if this acid rain is seeping into the soil, what's gonna grow from that? And as an artist, and whether it's cheesy or not, like my job is to, make work, but also I believe that I'm here to make some change, whether it's small or big or whatever. So the artists in that magazine were all doing something amazing, and I felt like that was this new foundation, this mushrooming of growth over this acid rain, over the soil.
I'm like deathly allergic to mushrooms.
Really?
So you say the word mushroom and I'm like, oh God, no. And I start looking for my EpiPen.
Wait, all mushrooms?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good to know.
It's not a pretty thing. But I want to stay with this piece for a minute because I have a couple questions about it. But one, I want us to go back to your notes. And when you say play, I think it's interesting that you reference that as part of your practice, that there is this balancing between the very serious and dangerous and a playfulness that you're trying to bring back into it. So I want you to talk to me a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about the materials because it's such an important part of your work. And yet the materials themselves are in some ways really dangerous. I mean, there are things that don't break down in the environment. They are these, symbols of progress, but really symbols of destruction. So I'm curious with how, you literally play with those ideas in terms of like regeneration, and the cycle of death and rebirth. And
yeah, it's so embedded in the material aspect because I am, like I said, a collector of things. So for me, that really means I'm collecting a lot of garbage. I'm collecting a lot of things, a lot of waste. Like people give me boxes of stuff that they don't want, and so it's about breathing new life into these objects that were literally just going to get trashed. But also more than that, I don't keep everything. It's a curation. It's like a very like, does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So there's play, but there's also this other element happening of like, I have a ton of other stuff in my studio that just I haven't used, or maybe I won't ever because it maybe doesn't make sense. But I do feel like some weird sense of obligation to like, rescue stuff that is literally going to be thrown away, or personal things like I made a piece with like my grandfather's slides. They were all going to be tossed, but to me it was like, no, like let's preserve his memories and do in a new way. So I think that I tackle the material like I'm not afraid to use, plastics and things. I mean, we're living in the Anthropocene. We're a part of it. I can't, if I go and live in the countryside and go off the grid, okay, then maybe I have a right to say, well, I'm not going to use any of this stuff, but I'm in it. I'm living it every day,
Yeah.
So I think that it's important to acknowledge it, but also critique it, And so, and I definitely worked in the movie field a little, doing some things, and that world was devastating to me because it was so much waste. It was really hard for me to make a thing and then know that the whole thing would just go to a landfill later. So that just wasn't the right world for me. So for me, it's about this rebirth through the material, but not just the material, but through the recombination. What can happen from combining something in a new way, and creating systems, because everything is a system in my mind, a sort of if you do this way, you have to do this one this way. There's just all these systems, and then the play comes when I'm I get to watch a lot of TV while I'm making stuff.
But okay, I want to talk about the vinyl though.
Yeah,
I mean this. So, tell me what that material means to you.
So I wrap everything from the tiniest little bead. You can see it's been wrapped, and that's with recycled green screen. So not everything is vinyl, but it's just easier for me to be able to play with vinyl because it's inexpensive and there's colors and things. But the act of wrapping is super key because it's the membrane, it's the skin, it's the way that these organisms are growing. If it's in my mind, I'm if it's not wrapped, it can't. There's no way that it can be a part of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the sinews in between that build the thing. So it's really become kind of an important part of how I work. Yeah, because they're all become a new body, a new being or organism. Yeah.
But it's also an act of tenderness.
Yeah.
This idea of swaddle and coddle and hold.
Everything is special.
And,
no matter if it's the most ugly part, it's still special. I've touched it, which is crazy, but yeah.
And so an object like this, just tell me the time, because you're very much interested in time. So what does this take time-wise?
I probably, something like this, maybe 2 months. Maybe.
And do you start from a place in the middle and work your way out?
So that's actually, okay, so this is a really good one for an example. Sometimes I use an object to start. And that was this is a cue ball, a decaying cue ball from the 60s. And, I've had it for maybe 15 years, just as an object that I just thought was interesting. And then again, but I kept staring at it over the years, which is kind of what I do. I get a little obsessed with something, and I'm this needs to be, it talks to me. So that, for this piece, that's how this began. But what was actually special about this is that it ended with, it's hard to see from where you're sitting, but this image that's around is a woman, her name's Helen. Her son was murdered by the cops in 2009. And I'm doing some other work with her and her image. But this was just the beginning of me incorporating it into something, and it just made sense. So this piece really is talking about this decaying cue ball, which is earth form, the growth that can come from that. Again, similar to this mushrooming, what's the growth from all this destruction? And then her sort of being the keeper of all this, I don't know, it somehow just made sense, but I kept having this vision of these weeds going through the cracks. If you have cement and there's just this beautiful flower coming through, and how, it's it lived through this concrete. And her being sort of that being, that power coming through, and through this regrowth, this rebirth. So, yeah.
And so then you have images of agave, I think that's that. Or
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. There's a corpse flower. There's images from India.
and lots of insects.
Yes.
And tell me how all of those things.
It's
speak to
all
you.
about, in my mind, I'm like, we are literally all connected. Going back to that Vera Stanley Alder book of her talking about this blue thread that connects every single thing together, whether you're a bug or you're a human, and so the importance of all of that being, like, the one thing that really I think about a lot is, like, if you zoom out and look at the earth, you don't see you don't see me, you don't see a bug, you just see earth.
Yeah.
That's what we are. We're just that. And so that's my reasoning for, like, including a lot of, like, creatures and bugs and, like, different things that I'm just that's just what I like. I'm like, this is a cool spider and it needs to be in there,
Got it. I mean, I like this idea of, and you do stones and seeds and geodes and
Those are noodled from Cooperpedia, Australia.
opal.
I guess,
Those are
yeah.
opal. Yeah. So when you were in Australia, what did you feel like just being in? Did you work with indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities? Were you?
I did more of a guided tour on my own. I was there for like 5 weeks, and I went to a million art shows and a lot of indigenous, like, cultural center. I kind of, like, made my own way. And I don't know, I always have just had this connection because this is a people that have been there for 50,000 years. I mean, just think of that. That's amazing. And then in 200-year span, their whole culture is just screwed up, and for lack of a better word. And so there's, for me, this connection, this deep sense of connection to that struggle in a different way. I mean, I cannot say I have the privilege of being in a group for 50,000 years. I mean, that's just, to me, that's just such it's so much pride. It's so beautiful. And then to hear that they're going through the same racial issues, totally different, but also the same. I don't know. It was just, I've always just had this connection, and I was supposed to do a program there, and it got canceled. So I felt even more like, like I need to go there.
Yeah.
So when I got to go, it became, it was emotional. It was a moment of collection in terms of experience and stories and objects. Actually being there took me to a whole nother place with the work, because I found, like, in a vintage store, some artifacts that were like racist swizzle sticks of, like, black women that were progressively getting older, but it was like a joke, but it was just disgusting. And that moment of finding that particular artifact in that vintage store kind of pushed the work into a whole new place. So it was a really significant trip, but I just culturally, I think sometimes I get obsessed, like I attach myself to a certain group, and I'm like, I need to know everything about it,
But I think it's interesting in the wrapping that you do that, and you look at their origin stories and their Dreamtime work, and there's a lot of that sort of circular sensibility, of not only holding space, but, like, really making space, both in the work, in the artwork, and in the Dreamtime, and in, this reality, that they are doing what you're doing, which is, like, excavating multiple dimensions of time and space and where they fit in, and that's pretty remarkable. So let's, I'm going to pivot because I have no idea what time it is. I'm going to pivot because I want to talk about Noah Purifoy.
Ooh.
He was on your list.
You read that list really fast.
Yeah.
Like, you have a good memory. Oh my God.
Tell me what your affinity is with Noah.
Well, I've been to his place in Joshua Tree like 30 times already, and I think personally, I didn't always have influences of, you can do this work, you can make big work, you can make mixed media work. Like, it just was kind of like oh yeah, that's great, it's in a museum, but you need to make your jewelry, you need to make small things. And so to see someone who, knowing that he started his career like when he was 40, and he didn't. It didn't happen because of a tragic event, the Watts riots, and that's where he kind of began this sort of excavation of materials and sort of, I don't know. There's just something so inspirational about it, and just so I'm just like, how amazing. You spent your whole life, you didn't even know this is what you were good at or anything, but here you are putting your whole being into it and making amazing work. So the fact that he's working with multiple materials, he's creating these, you can walk into them and experience them, that's really where I want the work to go. And I mean, like, I'm so happy for where the work is now, but like, ultimately I want to create an experience where you can move in it. And the fact that you can do that with his work, and then it is still very closely tied to content and society. It's not just a pretty object. It's not just a, like, look how cool and big this thing is. No, it means something. So, yeah.
Did you know I sit on that board?
Yes, and Elliot told me, he was like, tell her you should be on the board.
Oh, you want to be on the board?
He said that I should be. I don't know if I should be. He said that.
I mean, I think it's an interesting, it's an interesting space because, he's obviously gone, the work is finite, but when he was alive and he was making, and he left LA, because LA is difficult. And it's an interesting idea to me that right now, young, talented, Black artists are flocking here. And when you look at sort of the history and the people like Noah, and like Ulysses Jenkins, who has a fabulous show at the Hammer now.
He's my next door neighbor. So weird.
That there is this dissonance in a way between that history and those people, and this moment of Chocolate City right now, where where if you're young and Black and you say the word trauma, people are paying attention. And he moved out to the desert out of necessity. He wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to go and open this space. He had to. It was through the generosity of some folks who could give him space, and he could continue to work and live. And there's this real, to me, in LA right now, just, I don't know, there's this tension that is not really well expressed between what the city stands on and the shoulders that people stand on, and what it's becoming in this moment of just this insatiable desire to literally consume Blackness, and it's a fleeting one.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are a lot of correlations between you and Noah, certainly in your use of materials and your play, and the seriousness of your work. But I like the fact that you reference him because he is an elder for you. And I've seen lately so much theft and grift, of our community and our thinkers and aesthetics, and without any real recognition, acknowledgement, valuation, gratitude of
what came before, the reason why you're here.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
that. That's what we had to talk about, Noah. You know?
No, I'm so glad because all of that is really key and important. Just not just for me, but I feel like when I have later, I've learned about certain people later in life, and I'm like, well, how come I didn't know about this person? I'm always so like shocked and mad because I'm like, why didn't anybody? This person's amazing, and that's how I felt about him when I had just moved here. I had moved here in 2017. I had no clue who he was before that, and why. That's kind of thing like drives me insane. So. I've just been, and that's why I've been there 3 times already, like just to be able to absorb it all. And I get it, like it's hard to live here and do this big stuff. It's hard to do your thing here. It's expensive. There's so many things. And so that's also, I'm like, I need land. I'm like, Noah, I'm channeling you.
Well, I think he was at Chenard for a minute, but let's go backward from there or forward, I guess, really, because that became Cal Arts. So tell me about
I know, it's so crazy.
Your experience there.
I had a great, look at my little Cal Arts crew over here. No, I am so grateful that I went to Cal Arts, and I know there's a lot of, people, there's a lot of ickiness around graduate school and people, being upset about certain things. But overall, for me, my experience was really positive and it was challenging, and I think that in a great way. And I think that happened because of my place in life. Like I had done so much, traveled so much, had a business, worked for people, like done all these things that helped my practice to be what it is. I let there be time for me to let it make sense, because I don't feel like it makes sense for everyone when they just go right after undergrad. It's like, what are you talking about? What do you have to say? And a lot of times they don't know. And so I really feel like I benefited from waiting. And because of that, I was super hyper focused, and they know I was like in my studio 24/7. So I was ready. I was ready to take on the challenges and the papers and all that stuff. If I had gone a different time in life, maybe it'd be different. But I think for me, it was like that push to help me understand what is the work about. Before I had gone there, I had been working more on like, it was more of dealing with my identity or dealing with racial issues, but it was very, it just wasn't fully realized, and I just feel like grad school helped me to figure some stuff out it was able to push the work and elevate it on every level. So, and all the dramas and stuff. I was like, she would call me the grandma. She was like, because I was always like, everybody just love each other. But it's true. Like, just do the work. Don't be upset with each other.
Interesting. I'm just going to leave it right there and move on.
Okay.
I heard you say it somewhere that you were interested in mirrors. I don't know. I read that somewhere. Okay. I heard that, or at least there are elements.
A fragment. I do think of the show as sort of a fragmented mirror of the times. Yes.
And so I wanted to sort of dig down in that because mirrors, of course, reflect and they can distort and they can act as portals in a different way. And so I wanted you to talk us through the way you see that happening with your work.
Well, I think it's happening on 2 levels. So, like, actual using of mirrors. Like, I have a couple of prisms in some works, and they're all cracked and broken. And to me, this just becomes this metaphor for, like, the times. Like, if we reflect on what's happening, it's a mess. It's all cracked, it's all scratched. But then on this piece over here, and I'm sorry because I'm like, I have a lot of titles. Eyes of the Storm, Shifting Systems, Removing Barriers. There's a mirror in the center,
Yeah.
and that specifically, that works differently. To me, that's like bringing the viewer into the story. That's this storm system is pulsing in and out, but yet you can see yourself clearly in that mirror. And the color of the mirror is this blue, which obviously I think lends itself for, a mood, a feeling, and it just became this way of implication of the viewer into the world that we're in, into this time. So I kind of use it in different ways, but overall, I think the show itself becomes a fragmented mirror metaphor in itself of what we're all dealing with. The storm system is this, the times that we're in, this hurricane energy, this like stripping, this like feeling of destruction and of the foundation underneath us it's working as a mirror in a way. But in my way, in my eyes, in my view.
And how important is that in terms of just translating that to the viewer? I'm just curious.
I think that I like to give you enough clues that you're not being told exactly what's happening, but you also can enter it into many ways and figure it out for yourself, or figure out something that just makes you think of whatever you may think it is. Like, I like that open-endedness. And this is probably the most abstract work that I've done in a while, because I do feel like the past work has really been about, like one of the last shows I did was about St. Louis. It was all about the history of St. Louis, and so that was very specific. This is much more, pulling back from a specific moment or a specific city or a specific trauma. It's like all the trauma.
Yeah.
All the times. Like, what do we feel now? And yeah.
Do you think it's important for people to know that a Black woman made this work?
Yes and no. I think that people tend to want to, oh, you're a person of color, you're not making something with just a face. So I get either shunned or they're intrigued, and I could do that. I could do, and I am making some work with her, but that's because it works with what I'm doing. It's not because I'm catering to like what the trend is.
Yeah.
And that annoys me. I'm just like, oh, you're ignoring me because I'm not doing a Black woman figure. That work is gorgeous and there's a place for that, but that's not what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
I think there's more to explore. And, it doesn't mean I'll not ever work figuratively. It just has to make sense for where I'm at, and I just, I'm a kind of person that's like, oh, there's a trend happening? No, I'm not joining the trend. I just, until like 5 years, like I didn't join Instagram till like everybody was already doing it. I didn't know what a hashtag was. Like, I am late, but I'm also like purposely like, this is just specifically for the work. I'm like, let's find other ways to talk about things. Let's figure out. So when I say, yes, I want people to know that a person of color made the work, but I'm like, is that what they should know? No, I think it's a little like, let's look at the art first and then know the person, or like maybe, you'll find you'll see it within the work anyway.
Right. I was going to say, it seems that your identity informs the work.
Yes.
So it's deeply embedded in it. And looking, the elements of her as a woman, as a mother, as the captive maternal energy that, literally has wrapped and protected and lost, and wrapped and protected and lost. It seems to me to be very much part of your visual language anyway. But exactly. I personally think it's hugely important, and because it counters that erasure that we talked about with the Dogon, with Noah, with, the dream paintings, the dream time, that if the West can take it and
Yes.
appropriate it or erase your identity, that is an act of violence.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So next time on the quiz,
Okay. Yes,
when
ma'am.
someone says,
I failed.
but I want to talk about, you started as a painter,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and then you went into fashion, and then you became a sculptor. So
When you say it that way, it sounds crazy.
No, I mean, I think it's really quite beautiful, and it seems to be also deeply embedded in the work. To me, that there's all of you in there.
Yeah, yeah.
But just walk me through a little bit about where you pivot, how you realized from one.
So when I was an undergrad, I thought that I was going to be a painter, like for sure, or museum studies. Like it was those two things. And then once I was starting to apply for museum studies after school, it was really just a fear. Like, what am I going to do after I graduate? I'm so scared, So it was really a fear moment of me applying for something like that. And a painting teacher was like, but you're a painter. What are you doing? And that shifted everything. It was like, oh, you're right. But then having, parents and being in a world where I didn't have any influence.
Those people.
Yeah, those people are very, they love me, but they also wanted me to be stable, So the idea of being an artist was not on their list, even though they believe in me, but So the fashion stuff was out of necessity. Like I lived in New York, I was living in Brooklyn, and I was like, I'm a maker. I mean, I spend hours on things. Like I need to use my hands and make things. So the craft side of me took over. Mm-hmm. And I was doing my jewelry and I was making hand-painted clothing. So I was still painting. It was different. And I was selling on the street in Manhattan every weekend. Like that was my job. So that was a necessity. I was like, I don't want a real job because I want to make my art, but then how do I make money quickly? But it was also crazy. But also I grew up, we would sell things at flea markets. My dad went back to medical school, so we needed money. So we were very just like, my mom is a very entrepreneurial type of person, so she was like, we're going to be clowns. We're going to be whatever. She's like, we got to hustle. So it was kind of this hustle that happened after school, after undergrad. And then as much as I sometimes am mad at myself for going that direction, I'm so grateful because that's the way the sculptural work began. It wasn't enough for me to just make a tiny thing. I needed to experiment. So even though I'm doing this work, this job of like selling and vending and shows and stuff, I was on the side always doing art, like just experimenting with material specifically. Mm-hmm. So it was gradual. It was not this and this and this happened. It was like years and years and moving out of New York and moving to Santa Fe and having space to create.
Are you worried about your work being considered? I noticed you separated craft from.
I think at this point I'm very happy to embrace the craft side. Yeah. Because that is what it is, but it's just I'm using it in a different way. I'm not just doing a ceramic piece. I'm like taking all the craft from my background.
But I think I think that is another kind of violence that the West has put on artists everywhere. This idea that there's a high art and then the rest of you all are just doing craft.
Yeah, yes.
And Santa Fe, weirdly enough, has kind of like milked that in a way and become the sort of capital of certain kinds of craft or art ideas, but they are, we need desperately to get rid of those distinctions.
I agree. I mean, it's like shocking that I would do certain programs or like sculptural programs, and I would be the maker. I'm the only one making things. Like, it blew my mind because I just didn't understand. I had kind of taken a hiatus from the art world to be in this other world. And then when I'm coming back in, I'm like, oh, it's weird for me to make stuff. What? It blew my mind, you know, and, but I still wasn't, I was like, no, there's still a place for me. I'm still very just like, you got to keep pushing forward. I don't care what anybody says, you know? And I'm really grateful to the craft contemporary world because I feel like, I've gotten some wonderful opportunities from that world, teaching students and different shows and things. And I think it's changing. I think slowly it's changing, but I do think there's some shifts happening where there's this new elevation. But that stigma's always going to be there probably. But I'm not going to stop making stuff, you know.
That good.
I passed that one.
Okay, so wait, let's see our time. Okay, this is, I want to end sort of where we began in a way, and then we'll open it up for questions because we're fine. I want to talk about the way that you incorporate natural elements into your work, like the palm fronds and the, you know, and the seeds, with all of this heavy sort of man-made material. That's a super interesting conversation for me. But the way that you place, like in this piece in particular, which is fascinating to me, tell me what the natural elements in this piece mean for you.
So, like I said, there's this progression of the show telling this narrative, and so we're in the sort of future zone, or what I would like to call the future zone, where I'm sort of
This is looking at Earth.
yeah, and this is like after the storm, after the hurricane, after all this destruction, the roots are exposed. So these are bamboo shoots, and they were trash, and I was like, no, we need to save all of it and make something out of it. But really, the reason why this started was because those two roots that were there, those like bulb pieces, were just calling to me. There was something about that shape and form that started it. It wasn't something higher, like, oh, this means this. It was just like, wow, this form is just so cool. And then that led to the sort of creation. And again, it's really, I'm mixing in, there's some images from a fire. There's all the fires that happened in California. There was like a news article about protecting the land. And so I really felt like this was this moment of, when you strip away and you expose those roots, and now the water sort of form on the bottom is this new nourishment to this new time, this new world. So that's how they work there. But it depends on what's happening. So like, there's sycamore seeds. There's a smaller piece that has like these sycamore seeds. And when I was actually at CalArts, I was just dissecting 7 seeds. I literally, they're like a ball that looks like an earth form, all made up of tiny, tiny, tiny little like sperm-looking little seeds. And I would lay them all out, count them all, cut them all up, wrap them with the vinyl, so each one got touched, and there's like thousands of them in one. And then reconfigure that into a new form. And that became a sort of metaphor for what does it mean to go into a community and rip it apart? And sometimes that's beautiful, sometimes that's horrible and traumatic. And really looking at all of those levels of reconfiguration of a community, but through the seeds. And
but is it like, is your use of materials sort of about opportunity? Like, so you found those and you said, I know what I want to do with those, or you see an image and you say, that's exactly what I'm looking for, or because you are a collector and you are sort of a hunter and gatherer, you go looking. And so where...
That's just a part of the practice anyway. I mean, I'm always collecting, and then before I start something, it's like putting a puzzle together. I have to go through all the archives of collections, and I have in my mind something that I might want to do, and I'm like, I get them all out. I lay them all out. I look at every... I may not use them all, but I need to have the objects in front of me for them to like tell me what they want to do. And so, yes, the bamboo I had for only a year before I started doing this. Other things, 10 years, 15 years, it really depends on what it is. So it's a mixture of, perfect example, the two palm tree parts, the one that's hanging and the one in the front. That was opportunity. I'm just like, wow, this is a cool shape, and then I'm like, what could this be? I don't know. Let's put it to the side. And so it depends. It depends. But I like having that element of nature and man-made, because I feel like, again, that's the world we live in. Where I'm just reflecting, again, with the mirror idea, I'm reflecting back this world, which is so much nature, that's, I think people forget. Like, I have a family in the Bay, and I was like, I love living in LA because there's all these cool plants that I've never seen. I'll just be walking and seeing and they're just like, nature? What nature in LA? I was like, how dare you? I was insulted because I see it everywhere, and a good example of just how my brain works. When I had to go to the Bay this past week, and when I got off the plane, it's a like kind of a crazy zone in Oakland, the Oakland area. It's like industrial or whatever. But the thing I saw was the trees. I was like, oh, the trees are different here. I was like, oh, they're so different from LA. And that's just how I'm always like seeing that first. And so it's like, where does my brain go? The brain goes to the nature, but then, there's some cool man-made objects that I like too.
Do you consider yourself an intuitive maker? You said you let that these objects speak to you and tell you what they want and where they want to be.
Yes. I think that's I've never described it that way, but I think that's actually what it is. And I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, and I do feel very connected to my ancestors and things. So I do feel like each and every object has an energy, and putting those objects together in one thing creates a whole new energy, and I feel it. I can feel it. That's how I know when something's done or if I should keep going. It's super intuitive. Yeah, and I think that's, again, like the grad school stuff helped me flush that out. Like, I was like, oh, you need to trust yourself way more. And now it's become like second nature. I trust my the way that I work. But that's taken time, so, yeah.
These are very good answers.
Thank you.
Let's open up for some questions.
Yay.
Are there questions?
Yes, Todd.
Another question. I just wanted to say, the whole time you're talking, it's spiritual. It moved me.
Thank you, Todd.
Your work moved me. And I couldn't stop looking at the gentleman with the glasses right there. I don't know, it's a picture of someone with the glasses on the edge.
Oh, the woman. Okay, so that's...
Sorry, the woman.
Yeah.
Well, this is amazing.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Todd.
You're just amazing to me. Just wanted to let you know.
You make my day.
It is it's really interesting that you feel, I think viewers, everyone feels the energy that you were talking about, this sort of, not alchemic necessarily, but this sort of merging energy between all of these disparate objects into this new thing, that it does feel very spiritual, or part of a process that's far greater than than the singularity of humanity that we often get sort of drilled down by, that we are existing in this very particular reality. And I think that your work really starts to rip away at that, literally.
Thank you.
And builds up the possibilities of other spaces.
Yes, that's what I'm like, you see my vision. You get an A+ for that. Yes.
Looking at the Dogon people, it's almost like that helped you also trust your own, intuition, and almost like an opening for you to allow yourself to just follow yourself.
Yes. No, I love that you say that. Yeah.
As your friend, it's your friends who love and support you. It makes me really happy, that you're getting these opportunities, because I remember even when we were at CalArts, it's like people didn't know what to do or how to respond, and we had so many conversations. So I'm so happy that these conversations are being had, that people are paying attention and looking, and I hope they keep looking.
Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you. Bigger, more. That's what
I do think it's interesting that what you said about at this moment where people want to see the Black figure, and being dismissive of any kind of abstraction from that it's like, oh no, well, let me get to that next Amawako painting.
It's like that did to Howard Daniel Condell.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which they've been doing.
Another person who I discovered later, and I was like, why didn't I know about her? Sorry, yeah.
Pick up on that, actually. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for coming.
Gosh, I have so much to say. My question, out of several, I think the first question that I'd like to ask, and we can talk about other things later, but following on that point is you talked about Noah Purifoy and your relationship to somewhat implicitly your relationship to landscape and scavenging and assemblage. And so I was just wondering if you think about your work in a kind of, maybe not Black feminist tradition of assemblage and abstraction, but Black women makers who are also doing that work all across the 20th century into now, and Jill was saying, that history has been erased, and we're starting to, Sylvia Snowden had a show downtown, which is crazy that she's in her 70s. The same with Alma Thomas and Suzanne Jackson and all of these other kind of amazing Black women artists who've been innovating materials in similar ways, taking these man-made materials and thinking about nature and spirituality and all of these kinds of. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about how your work kind of builds on and maybe extends that legacy.
I feel like I'm so sad that I'm, just learning about certain people at this time in my life. So I think that makes me hone in on them even more now, because I'm like, oh my God, this person, and I get so excited and I start going and researching, especially when it comes to women. I feel like, I was even thinking about the list that I was making. I was like, whoa, most of these people that I'm influenced by are men. And ties into the fact that even, family members or whoever are like, can't you make something smaller? I'm supposed to make something smaller. And I'm like, it's like, is it because I'm a woman I'm supposed to make something smaller? Or because, it's there's a lot of stuff to that. But I do feel, really just side story, when I was living in New York right before I moved here, I went to a show at the Guggenheim. So many layers to that. $25 to get in. Only person of color that I saw there besides the security guards. And then the show that I went to see was, she's from Iran. She passed away, and I'm going to say her name wrong. Oh my God. I don't want to say it because I don't want to say it wrong. But she works with mirrors, and the show was gorgeous and beautiful. I was in awe, and then I see her walk in, and it was her first time seeing the show. She's in her 90s, and I was like, who cares about a celebrity, you know, like, I had chills from seeing her, and I was like following her, like, oh my God, she did this, she made this. And it was this moment of like, this is the first time in her career, I mean, she had some successes, but for real, that she was able to walk into her show and see the breadth of her work and like be recognized by some higher up or whatever. And me just feeling like this feeling of like, wow. A, she kept going. B, she's here right now in front of me. I get to see her, and me wanting to almost like step into her shoe in a way and like be like, I am carrying on this legacy, and I'm not gonna wait till I'm, not that it was her fault, but like I'm not gonna be 90. I'm gonna I gotta go right now. And not because I want fame, but like it's more about, I wanna make bigger and bigger work. Cause I'm crazy, but like I just, I like have this need, you know, but so to see someone who is really like pushing no matter what. And so yes, I feel like super embedded into this legacy of person of color, queer, all of these things. I'm like, yes, hello, and I'm doing something different. Please, like, not that I want to be like, oh, I'm better. It's more just like, just see something different. You know, just see something new and how new things can happen. It doesn't have to be the same things. So, I don't know if I answered you, but.
But I mean, let's just cap this a little bit. Only, I was just thinking like this shape, you know, there's a lot of Senga Ngudi, there's Barbara Chase Rabot here, there's, you know, you are part of, if you believe the Dogon, this is where it gets interesting, that you're part of a tradition of making, and certainly Black women makers, that whether you know who they are or not,
Yes.
they are part of you, and you are part of them, and you are carrying that legacy.
Yes, and the legacy
Regardless.
for me in that sense is my family, because that's how this all happened, because they were craft makers. You know, like my great-grandmother who I grew up with in my house was constantly making stuff, like constantly crocheting something, constantly sewing things, like they were always making. And, you know, their works were small and sweet, but like that tradition is so embedded in the way that I think. It's like I'm always thinking about them when I'm working. So yeah. Anyone else?
Last one? Anybody?
Yes.
It's interesting how we were talking about, you were saying, you know, people were saying, because I'm a woman, can't you make something smaller? And it's interesting because a lot of the pieces that I've seen of yours are large works, but I actually find them very inviting. Like there's something about them that kind of, like when I look at your work, it like wants us to come up and hug it or like be close to it. Like even though they're large pieces, like they're not arresting. There's something very familiar about each one of them. Like I feel like there's something that we relate to. Maybe it's the movement that they all have.
Nice. No, I'm glad. Thank you. Especially because, like, I know, like, and these are friends that you're not in the art world per se, you know, and so for me, it's like really important to hear how do you enter it. And so, yeah.
And then can I ask a question?
Yes. No, you can't.
Maybe it's always different, but how do you, and maybe it's not one answer, but how's a way or ways that you approach building a new creation? Like, do you think of one object, like, oh yeah, there's that thing that I found, like, and you thought of it again, and you thought, oh yeah, it's time to use that? Or do you like think of a feeling or like a dream, and do you sketch something, or you just grab and go? Maybe it's different.
No, and actually, it's kind of a process of all of that at once. So like a lot of times I will draw something out, and that drawing I'll start it, but then there's other things happening simultaneously that are because I'm working on that. So it's like, it's these threads, these connective threads that lead to the next thing. But so sometimes it's a drawing, sometimes it's like, oh, you know, I'm starting with that and I don't know where it's going. I'm letting it grow on its own. So it just depends on what I'm thinking, what I'm making. The pieces that I'm working on now that have to do more with Helen, the mother, they are really centered on her image, but it's still in my world. So it's like, you know, not like there she is. It's doing some stuff. You'll see. But they have their own. Each one is different. It just, when I get going, my brain is like knocking them out, you know, at once. I'll be working on 3 things at once. So.
Okay, this is, I'm gonna ask you the last question because it just reminded me. So there's so much, your pieces are very tactile. There's this need, I have this need, as I've been sitting here to like,
You can touch
you know,
them. Only you, not everybody.
Right, so I'm just curious how much you would tolerate or invite people to engage with them. Because you had talked about, when we started, talking about building, you know, making large enough works that people could literally sort of go into them. And so
I'm working on, so I'm going back to my fashion roots, and I'm working on some wearable objects that you can literally be in. But that's very different than making a installation. And so I am not sure yet. You know, to me, it's like, you know, in my mind, I have a vision of something you can enter, but it's got to be, you know, is it safe? Like, I just watched a whole video about the sculpture in New York that everybody's jumping off of, and the person who made it is like, anyway, I'm just like, I want people to live when they enter the work. So I think that I'm really curious what that will mean, you know, and I am very tactile, so I'm very much like, I want to touch things, you know, so there's a side to me that, you know, wants to have that element of touch, and but it has to make sense. It has to make sense for what the work is about.
do you think of these as ephemera?
What does that mean again?
I mean, so are they?
I was like, wait, what?
Like in a kind of temporary way. I mean, because the material itself, while it will last 1,000 million years in a landfill, you've intervened and it may not last.
Well, okay, so I have works that are heavily archivable, where I'm like actively coding and resining and like preserving. Mm-hmm. And then I have works that I've purposely allowed to die, allowed to shift and change through destruction, through being outside, through moving it with my body and doing a photo shoot and crumbling, like purposely, actively doing this task of destruction. So I am thinking both ways, because I want there to be works that you can see if we're here in 100 years, sure. But then I still allow myself the play, which I think of as like me figuring out, like activating a work with the body, with movement. It's like, it's a whole new realm. Even though I did the fashion, but that did not mean anything. It wasn't like, it was, oh, they're beautiful. It's not like, oh, you're doing this movement because this means this. So I feel like once I stepped into this contemporary world, it's just different now, and like I have the 2 sides, the experimental destruction. I want to see how disgusting it can get, how cracked and horrible it can get, because then that's another story. But something like this, no, this is like, it's telling a story, but it's also beautiful to me, and I want to preserve it, you know, forever. So there's two things going on.
I like that. Okay.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Aw,
That was awesome.
you're awesome.